Every so often, you get the opportunity to introduce people you like and respect, whose work helps you see the world in richer, more textured and inclusive ways. This is one of those times for me, and I think many of you know why. In 1993, I think it was, Muzan, Professor Fuel was the Barton Clinton Gordy lecturer at Boston Avenue Church and left her mark as an accomplished scholar and teacher. And as you may know, Dana Fuel has left similar marks at other institutions. She has twice been awarded the Scholar Teacher of the Year Award, sponsored by the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry of the United Methodist Church. In 1998-99, when she was at Southern Methodist University, 2004, for her work at Drew. And if that weren't enough, she's been a 3-time recipient of the Scholarly Outreach Award, sponsored by the Lilly Endowment. Dana earned her B.A. in religion from Louisiana College and then went to Emory University, which is also my alma mater, where she earned her master's in theological studies and her Ph.D. in Hebrew Bible. She taught for 13 years at Perkins School of Theology at SMU, before moving to Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, where she is professor of Hebrew Bible, teaching in the theological school and in the Casperson School of Graduate Studies. Her teaching and research interests include literary and cultural approaches to biblical narrative, feminist criticism, the Bible and art, biblical law and ethics, and the ethics of reading the Bible as scripture, asking those of us willing to pay attention, for whom do we read and why? In addition to numerous articles, Dr. Fuel is the author of 5 books, the editor or co-editor of 2 others. Her latest effort, The Children of Israel, Reading the Bible for the Sake of the Children, provides the context for her talk tonight at 7 o'clock as the Clarence Knippa lecturer at Grace Lutheran Church. Dana is married, has a teenage daughter, Aubrey, who is a budding writer, storyteller, like her mother. Her husband, David, teaches honors biology and environmental science at Mountain Lakes High School in Mountain Lakes, New Jersey. And they have a new puppy who will be testing the limits while there is one less person in the household to watch out for what little puppies do and for taking care of the house. There's, of course, much more to tell, but that will take away from the real treat this morning, spending time with Professor Fuel as she guides us on our encounter with biblical text. Please join me in welcoming Dana Nolan Fuel.
BYOB here. It's wonderful to be back here. It's been, I do the math, 13 years since I've been here. So I've got a lot to tell you, a lot to catch up on. What I'd like to do this morning is to present some material from my latest book. And this material is about the story of Hannah. Some of you may be very familiar with this story. About a woman who is barren and prays and finally gives birth to Samuel, who's probably a much better known figure in biblical narrative. But what I'd like to do this morning is to make the story a little bit more complicated for you. And in order to do that, I want to put it in the context in which it occurs in the Hebrew Bible. Most of the time when we read parts of the Bible, we're just reading little short snippets, and we don't always get the sense of where the story's coming in the flow of the larger story of Israel and how it relates to what has gone before and what comes after. So I'm going to do a kind of subversive thing today, and that is to read this story of Hannah in the context of the book of Judges. Now, the book of Judges you're probably not as familiar with. It doesn't make it into the lectionary very often. A lot of violence, a lot of sex, a lot of earthy stuff in the book of Judges. In fact, one of my students says, this is the book of the Bible that should have come in a brown paper wrapper, for those of you who know what that means. Well, let me just give you a quick overview, and then I'm going to jump right into the presentation. In the book of Judges, you have a whole series of stories about judges that lead Israel between the time that they come into the promised land and before the monarchy. And if you start looking at how those stories are structured through the book, what you find is, in the beginning, there's a kind of ideal story where they have an ideal judge and they have an ideal villain that they fight against. I think his name is Dark Double Evil or something like that. Just the perfect villain. And, God is on their side and they win their wars but with the next story, things get more complicated. And with the next story, things get even more complicated. And with each story, what you have is that the people wait longer and longer to cry out to God for help. And the leaders get more and more compromised in terms of the reasons why they assume leadership. And by the time you get to the end of the book, you're pretty much questioning the people, the leaders. You're wondering what's going on. They get to the point where they just don't bother to cry out to God at all. And you have leaders that just want power or they want vengeance, but you don't get the sense that they're really in tune with God. And by the end of the book, they've been fighting their enemies all around throughout the book, but by the time you get to the end, they're fighting each other. In other words, their enemies have moved closer and closer to home to the point where they can't even get along with each other anymore. And there's a devastating story at the end of Judges in which the tribes of Israel turn on the smallest tribe, the tribe of Benjamin, for a very ghastly offense. So I encourage you to go read this. Your assignment, your homework, is to go back and read the text. But in this story, as the other tribes are incensed at Benjamin, they turn to God and they say, instead of saying, what should we do about Benjamin? Should we fight Benjamin? Should we reprimand Benjamin? Instead of asking that question, they come and say, who shall go up first to fight against Benjamin? In other words, they've already made up their mind that they're going to go to war. They just want some kind of divine sanction. And God starts playing this very odd role, like, oh, you want to go fight your brothers? All right, go fight your brothers. See what happens. Well, it's devastating. They nearly wipe out the tribe of Benjamin. They kill all the women and children. There are only 600 men left. And then the people of Israel turn and look at each other and say, how could God have let this happen? How could God have nearly wiped out an entire tribe? And so here are all these men, no wives, and they look around and they say, well, we've got to get some wives for these men. And so they say, well, was there a town that didn't help us beat up on Benjamin? Yes, there was, by the name of Jabesh Gilead. And they attack this town. They kill everyone except marriageable young women. They round up these women to give to Benjamin. Not quite enough. There's still another 200 shy. And so they allow the men of Benjamin to kidnap young women who are dancing at the religious festival at Shiloh. And the book of Judges ends with a comment, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everybody just did what they pleased. When we open the first book of Samuel, we have the story of Hannah. Hannah and her husband and her husband's other wife are coming to Shiloh to celebrate at the festival. And there's a scene where she's very unhappy because she's barren. But in this story, we also learn about the priestly family of Eli. And Eli is constantly presented as someone who's basically incompetent. For one thing, he's always sitting down. Always sitting down. He never quite catches on to what's going on. He never hears a word from God, the text tells us. And his sons are absolutely corrupt. first sexual harassment in the Bible, I guess. They tend to harass the women who come to worship. They take more of the sacrifice from people offering the sacrifices. They take more than their fair share. They just basically, like the other people in Israel, do what they please. So this is the setting that I want you to think about the story of Hannah. And there's a very famous song that she sings. So I've entitled this Hannah's Song, and it's a midrash. It's a retelling of the story. It's written in lyrical form, and I'm just anxious to see what you think at the end. It was a long, long time ago, before there was a king in Israel, when the judges judged, righteously sometimes, and heroes fought, faithfully sometimes, and the people followed the Lord, sometimes, when it was convenient, and when they were in trouble. And the Lord looked after Israel for a while, until he felt like he was being taken for granted. It was a long, long time ago, when God had grown quiet. The future became uncertain, and the people mostly did as they pleased. It was a time when people who had been living peaceably side by side for years suddenly turned on each other in suspicion and violence. Neighbors, even kinfolk, began to treat each other as enemies, and everyone who was different was an enemy. It was a time when lives were cheap, when women were objects to be owned and disposed of at will, when children were murdered simply because of where they lived and who their parents were. A time when people were killed for their property, when real estate was more valuable than human life. It was a time when the clergy sold their services to the highest bidders, when people sought to buy personal security by building private sanctuaries and by employing ministers with the very best pedigrees. A time when priests confiscated for themselves the largest and best portions of the people's offerings to God. It was a time when clergymen harassed and seduced the women who came to serve and worship in God's house. A time when the people had been oppressed for so long they were content to live with oppression. It was a very long time ago. Or was it so long ago? When there was no leadership in the land, and people did whatever they could get away with. That was when it started. The song, that is. When a woman named Hannah rode into Shiloh with her husband and her husband's other wife and her husband's other wife's children. Now, Shiloh was a holy place where people came to worship, to bring their gifts and offerings to God. Eli had been a priest there for ages. He had even been there when all of those girls were rounded up for the men of Benjamin. Did you read about that? Shiloh, a holy prison camp for 400 young girls captured from Jabesh Gilead. Their families murdered so that the virgin daughters could be taken and given to men who needed wives. The weeping and wailing could be heard for miles. The men of Benjamin came and took them away. But they were not enough. So the Benjaminites returned and abducted 200 more girls while they danced at the annual festival. It was a pretty nasty episode, all right. Community-sanctioned rape. The screaming and sobbing could be heard for miles. Mothers mourning the loss of their daughters. Fathers and brothers being bullied into letting their daughters and sisters be taken away. Every family fractured. God knows how the girls themselves ever learned to live with it. But what's done was done. There was really nothing Eli could have done about all that. The people didn't even consult him. Why look to a priest for leadership when it comes to matters of life and death? Even the people themselves had turned their heads. Nothing was said. Nothing was done. After all, what's a tribe supposed to do when you kill all their women and children? What do they do? They'll have to do what they do in order to survive. And besides, what could a single priest do, really? Especially when the people want to blame the whole thing on God anyway. Hadn't it been the Lord who had made a breach in the tribes of Israel? So religious life went on as usual. Families continued to make their pilgrimages, celebrate their feasts, offer their sacrifices as if nothing had happened, as if their daughters had nothing to fear. But their daughters had plenty to fear. Their dances had turned to dirges, their laughter to lamentations. Their own community had conspired against them. Their holy ground had become a place of holy terror. Yeah, their daughters had plenty to fear, and so did everyone else. Eli, the indolent, the priest of passivity, had sons only too eager to abuse priestly power and position, molesting the women serving in the sanctuary, threatening the men offering their sacrifices. Rapacious, ravenous, their lust for flesh was never ending. And even though Eli knew what his sons were doing, he couldn't bring himself to do anything about it. A little slap on the wrist, a wagging finger. But in the end, what could a single priest do? Especially when his own livelihood was at stake. This was Shiloh, the holy place, where women young and not so young were routinely violated, where gifts to God were forcefully taken by men more interested in themselves than in their people. And one day, Hannah came to be there. Hannah and her song. It was a sad song in the beginning, a song born of great pain and frustration and longing. The song of someone caught in a world not of her making. Indeed, the song of someone who, by all rights, could never hope even to alter, much less remake, her own world. For you see, Hannah was barren. God and her body had betrayed her, refusing change, refusing to let her extend life into the world beyond. From the confines of a locked womb, the song began its mournful strains, a sorrowful echo trapped inside a body that could not change. No one else could hear the song. Certainly not Peninnah, Hannah's husband's other wife. But you can't blame her for not hearing the song. How would you feel if your husband took another wife? A younger one. A prettier one. As if you weren't good enough. How would you feel if he clearly loved her more than he loved you? If you were forced to watch his favoritism day after day, knowing that while you took care of the children, he was taking care of her. No. Peninnah was much too busy defending her own self-worth to hear Hannah's song. How in the world could she reach out to this other woman when her own storyteller had already labeled her a rival, when her own husband constantly pitted the two of them against each other? No, her role was already prescribed. There was nothing else she could do. She could only taunt Hannah with the one thing that she had that Hannah didn't: children. Some days, when the taunts were particularly relentless, when Hannah's feelings of emptiness were particularly unbearable, the song thundered in her head, but no one else could hear it. Certainly not Elkanah, Hannah's husband, but you can't really blame him for not hearing the song. As a man who had everything he wanted, indeed his name was God has acquired, he was completely bewildered by Hannah's discontent. He was perfectly happy with this marital arrangement. He had a wife to provide him children, and a wife to provide him pleasure, and the fact that he had two wives clearly brought him prestige in the neighborhood. Clearly, it was a measure of God's favor. Why couldn't Hannah be happy? He had given her everything a woman could possibly want, including himself. Am I not worth more to you than 10 sons? He used to say to her. Why can't you just be happy taking care of me? Don't you like ironing my shirts? After all, I'm a considerate, attentive husband, am I not? I treat you with favor. I notice when you're upset. Do I not show concern about your feelings? Why are you weeping? Why aren't you eating? What has made you so resentful? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? See, I even have an inkling what the problem is. I don't have to wait for an answer. Wait, where are you going? No, clearly Elkanah would never be able to hear any song that might displace him as the center of Hannah's life. To Hannah, the song was growing louder every day, but no one else could hear it. Certainly not Eli, the priest. But you can't really blame him for not hearing the song. Heavy, immobile Eli, sitting at the doorpost of God, always sitting, eyes failing, unwilling to do more, unable to do better. He wasn't used to seeing a woman praying in the holy place. His clergy sons had a way of keeping most of the women confused about who God was and what God demanded. Most women didn't make it into the sanctuary alone to speak to God face to face. In fact, after years of presiding over structured liturgy, Eli may have even forgotten what prayer from the heart really sounded like. Involuntary, uncontrollable prayer. It's no wonder he thought she was drunk. Hannah's song had become passionate. Passion makes people who have no passion very nervous. So nervous, they won't even ask you what you're praying about. Go in peace, says Eli. May the God of Israel give you whatever it is you've asked of him. Just don't bother me with it. Peninnah, Elkanah, Eli. You really can't blame any of them for not hearing Hannah's song. They were all just trying to survive in a world gone mad. Their lives were not perfect, and yes, they lived in fear like everyone else, but for the most part, they had escaped all the bad things that were happening all around them. Penina was not one of those women who had been violated on sacred soil. She had not been ripped from her home and given to a stranger. The children dying around her were not her children. Elkanah had lost neither family nor property in the recent tribal wars. Unlike the men of Benjamin, he did not have to scramble to find a wife or worry about how to perpetuate his lineage. Indeed, he had not one wife, but two, and many children, and many possessions. And Eli, despite the fact that he no longer heard a word from the Lord and was morally incapable of doing the right thing, still had the choicest appointment in the conference. They had all escaped. They were all surviving. They were all taking care of themselves. It's really no wonder they could not hear anyone else's song, especially a song as irrepressible as Hannah's song. So, what was so urgent about Hannah's song? Oh, we all know the story about how barren Hannah desperately wanted a child, how she prayed, and how God answered her prayer by giving her her son Samuel. We know the story, how Hannah's faith was repaid with ultimate reward. We like to tell it on Mother's Day, when we're feeling generous. On our more jaundiced days, we say, she caved in. She succumbed to social pressure. You ain't nothing if you ain't a mama. The mama of a boy child. Take that, Penina. I could do it too. But in actuality, Hannah's song was not really about motherhood, per se. Face it, any woman willing to hand over her 3-year-old son to a man who's done such a lousy job of raising his own kids is hardly eligible for the Mother of the Year award. But neither was it the song simply about wanting a better seat at the social table. No, Hannah's song was about something else, something more, something other, something different than the world in which she lived. It was a grand imagining of something else. A child, yes, but not just any child. Not a child to be kept and nurtured by her alone. A child to be shared. A child whose presence would not alter just her body, not just her status, not just her purpose in life, but the world itself. Hannah's song was certainly not about caving in. If anything, it was about saying no. No to the order around her. No to the order imposed upon her. In fact, the first word out of Hannah's mouth is no. No, my lord, she says to Eli. I am not a worthless woman. Desperate does not equal worthless. Your stereotypes do not apply. I am not a drunken spectacle. No, my lord, no. I am a woman hard-pressed of spirit. I have been pouring out to God my deepest yearnings. From my great protest and frustration, I have been speaking all this time. It's no wonder no one wanted to hear her song. Who wants to be confronted with that kind of pain? That much anger? Who wants to be incriminated? Who wants to have to respond? Only God. Only God is willing to hear Hannah's soundless song, words that can't even break the silence. O Lord of hosts, look upon the oppression of your servant. Remember me. Do not forget. Give your servant the seed of men, and I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. From a God who has been as immobile as Eli, as resistant to change as Elkanah, as indifferent to her suffering as Peninnah, Hannah asks for movement, for alteration, for a seed, an opening in her womb and in her life. It's just a seed. Despite the fact that he is implicated in her misery, God assents and grants her a child. Not just any child, but a child that will, in his person, represent God's presence and extend Hannah's vision into the broader world. A child that will be shared by God and Hannah with the rest of Israel. His name shall be, His name is God, for I sought him from the Lord. Aren't you coming to Shiloh? Asks Elkanah after Samuel is born. To give up my child so soon, she thinks, so things can go back to the way they were for you before? To be part of your ritual of favoritism so that I will feel obligated to you? To be reminded again of the wrongs of Shiloh? No, she says, not while the child is nursing. Knowing and thinking, the song is in the milk. Once he is weaned, I will bring him, she says, and then he must stay there for good. Knowing and thinking, once the song is sung in Shiloh, it will be up to Samuel to learn to sing it for himself. Give my portion to Peninnah. Give my greetings to Eli the priest. Tell him, don't bother getting up. Excuse my absence. God knows what I am doing. The song is in the milk. Do what seems right in your eyes, responds Elkanah. Remain here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord raise up his word. His word? What word? If God had offered a word, I wouldn't have to offer my son. But until then, the song is in the milk. The months go by, then the seasons. 2 more times, Elkanah asks. 2 more times, Hannah declines, keeping her son and her song to herself. She watches him gradually wander farther and farther from her reach, becoming too interested in the world around him to take his mother's milk. And then, one day, the milk dries up, and the song is caught in Hannah's throat. With the shadow of Shiloh chilling her bones, she prepares for the journey from which her son will not return. A 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, a jar of wine suffices to celebrate and sustain her son in Shiloh. It's the same old Shiloh, but a different Hannah. Before, her lack had been so deep She could not even bring it to pass her lips. Now, both a son and a song cross the bounds of her body to bring a shareable excess into the world. No doubt Eli, and perhaps his sons as well, see in the young Samuel an apprentice to be taught and trained, a child offered on account of a parent's respect for the religious institution and the priestly office. Hannah, however, sees differently. The boy enters the service of God, his presence becoming a service to all around him. He is the child who will speak wisdom to the adults, who will model a different way of being. As a child, he will do what no adult can. As a child, he is part of the upside-down world Hannah envisions in her song, the song that finally finds its way into the open air. My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is lifted high on account of the Lord. My mouth is open wide against all those hostile to me. I revel in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is none besides you. There is no rock like our God. Speak no more arrogance, nor let impetuous words come forth from your mouth, for the Lord is a knowing God. He has the measure of abusive deeds. The weapons of the mighty are broken. Those stumbling are clothed in strength. Those once with plenty hire themselves out for bread. The hungry hunger no more. While the barren gives birth to 7, the one with many sons has become despondent. The Lord deals death and gives life, sends down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord impoverishes and enriches. He casts down, he lifts high. He lifts the lowly from the dust. From the garbage dump, he raises up the needy and seats them among the nobility. He gives them a seat of honor as their inheritance. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's. He has set the whole world upon them. He guards the feet of his faithful, but the wicked shall be silenced in darkness, for not by force shall one prevail. The opponents of the Lord shall be shattered. In the heavens he will thunder against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and raise the horn of his anointed. You were expecting a lullaby, perhaps? Hannah's song is not for those trying to sleep through life. Not for those safe and secure in the world as it is. Hannah's song is for the others who want and deserve to be safe, but who are never likely to be that. Hannah's song is a vision that burns the eyes and stings the ears. It is a vision of a world other than the one she has known in her lifetime. A world where violators and violations would be brought to an end, where the arrogant speech of greedy priests and patronizing husbands and rival wives would be silenced, where barren women might have children, the hungry would be fed, and all those trampled into the dust would be lifted up and set back on their feet again. A world where the faithful could live without fear, where the bottom becomes the top, the last becomes the first, the margins become the center. Is it really any wonder that no one wanted to hear this song? If you've negotiated this world with all its evils, if you've survived and even succeeded according to the rules of this world, why would you want to hear a song like Hannah's? It's so much easier to let things be. Perhaps that's why her song is met with silence. With silent indulgence, young Samuel is taken into the house of God as the answered prayer of a desperate woman, to be a houseboy in the house of God, an assistant, the hands, feet, ears, and eyes of Eli. And Hannah goes back home to remake her life with Elkanah and to make coats for her son, and once a year to follow her husband to Shiloh. When and only when Hannah lays aside things political to take up things domestic, does her loan of Samuel earn her a blessing from Eli. 5 more children. Did she ask for them? Did she want them? The story doesn't say. 5 more children to care for, yet Samuel is never forgotten. Thus Hannah becomes a traditional wife and mother, and less of a disturbance to those around her. And yet, she is different. No longer barren and unchangeable, no longer sad and silent. She's had a vision. She's birthed a son. She's composed a song. And now she makes more children and coats. With every child, she extends herself and her vision into the world. With every coat, she embraces her son, protecting him from the elements. With every coat, she reminds her son to make what he can out of what he's been given. With every coat, she shows her son the relationship between imagination and compassion. With every coat, she tells her son he is not alone. And in every coat, she weaves the song so he can clothe himself in strength. Once simply the recipient of Elkanah's largesse, Hannah is now generous to the world. And unlike Elkanah's allotment of sacrificial portions, Hannah's gifts dictate no particular response. She doesn't insist on gratitude or reciprocity. Her song, her son, her children, her coats are gifts of change and surplus, gifts that disrupt the equations and stagnations offered by those around her, gifts that declare this is not a world where one husband equals 10 sons, where personal indulgences are just as good as the honoring of God, where it's just as well to let corruption continue as it is to do anything to stop it, where one thing is just as good as another, where it is easier to let things stay as they are. The world can be better than this. Hannah's gifts chant transformation and excess. There is more that can be done. There is more that can be shared. There is more that can be. There is more. There is more. There is more. In time, God, too, catches on, taking the lead from Hannah's song. God, too, tests the divine capacity to recreate. God formulates a vision of change. Those gorging on the choicest portions of holy sacrifice will find themselves begging for bread. The barren woman has given birth. A new priest shall rise up, one who will listen for the word of the Lord, one who will speak God's will to the people, who will be trustworthy as a leader of Israel and a prophet of God. There is more that can be. Indeed. Samuel. Here I am, Eli. You called? No, my son. I didn't call. Go lie down. Samuel. Here I am, Eli. I heard you call me. No, my son. Go back to sleep. Samuel. Here I am, Eli. I know you called me. No, my son. You've heard something beyond me. Something different. Something else. Lie back down and listen. Samuel. Samuel. Speak, Lord. Your servant is listening. Samuel. I am about to do a thing in Israel so new that it will sting the ears of all who hear of it. That sounds like a song my mother used to sing. Indeed, it is a song worth knowing, and it's time you learned to sing it too. Sing, Lord, your servant is listening. Samuel, my son, here I am, Eli. What did you hear? A song my mother used to sing. Did you ever hear her song? No, not really. That's too bad. You should have listened to her song, Eli. You should have taught it to your children. Can you sing it for me now, my son? Yes, I can, but it will make your ears sting.